Hi guys, welcome Horizons is episode 7 Vietnam the Quiet Miracle. Let's talk about Vietnam, the country that won a war against the world superpower and won the peace by embracing the war system it fought against. In 1975, Vietnam was devastated. Decades of war had killed millions, destroyed infrastructure, poisoned the land with Agent Orange and unexploded ordnance, and left the country among the poorest on the earth. The victorious communists unified the country but then proceeded to make things worse with collectivization, authority, and rigid central planning. By the mid 1980s, Vietnam was experiencing hyperinflation, food shortages, and economic collapse. The Soviet Union, its main patron, was itself collapsing. Vietnam faced a choice: double down on ideology or embrace pragmatism. They chose pragmatism. In 1986, Vietnam launched Đổi Mới Renovation, a series of economic reforms that opened the country to foreign investment, allowed private enterprise to collectivize agriculture, and integrated Vietnam into the global economy. It was Vietnam's version of China's reform and opening up, just a few years behind. The results have been nothing short of miraculous. Vietnam went from one of the world's poorest countries to a lower middle income nation. GDP growth has averaged 6-7% annually for decades. Over 45 million people were lifted out of poverty. Vietnam became a major manufacturing hub, attracting companies like Samsung, which now produces half its smartphones in Vietnam. Intel, Nike, Adidas, they are all there. Vietnam is now the fastest growing major economy in Southeast Asia. This is the quite miracle. A communist country that embraced capitalism without abandoning political control, a former enemy of America that now a key partner, a war-torn nation that became a manufacturing powerhouse in a single generation. So how did Vietnam do it? What is driving the success? And can it continue? Let's start with what Vietnam got right. The Doi Moi reforms, the renovation reforms, were comprehensive and sustained. Agriculture was decollectivized, allowing farmers to sell surplus on the market. Vietnam went from food importer to the world's second largest rice exporter. Private enterprise was legalized. State-owned enterprises were reformed, though not eliminated. Foreign investment was actively courted with special economic zones and tax incentives. Crucially, Vietnam invested heavily in education. Literacy rates soared to over 95%. The population is young, educated, and increasingly skilled. Vietnamese students perform remarkably well in international assessments, often outscoring much wealthier countries. This is human capital, is Vietnam's greatest asset. Vietnam also benefited from timing. It opened up just the global supply chains were expanding and companies were looking to diversify beyond China. Vietnam offered lower cost than China, political stability, strategic location, and improving infrastructure. It was perfectly positioned to capture manufacturing investments. The government, while authoritarian, has been relatively competent and pragmatic. Corruption exists, is a significant problem, but it hasn't reached the kleptocratic levels that destroy economies. Infrastructure investment has been substantial. Ports, roads, industrial parks have been built at scale. The business environment, while far from perfect, is workable. Vietnam has also been strategically savvy in foreign policy. It's normalized relations with former enemies and it's signed free trade agreements with everyone: the EU, Japan, South Korea, the comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, called as CPTPP, after the US withdrew. Vietnam is deeply integrated into global trade. Exports are over 100% of GDP, one of the highest ratios in the world. Then there's the China factor, which is absolutely central to understanding Vietnam's trajectory. The US China trade war and the tech rivalry have been a windfall for Vietnam. Companies looking to reduce dependence on China, the China plus one strategy, have poured investment into Vietnam. Samsung moved production. Apple suppliers are building factories. Vietnam has been perhaps the biggest beneficiary of supply chain diversification. But here is where it gets complicated because Vietnam's relationship with China is deeply ambivalent. And the countries fought a border war in 1979. They have ongoing disputes. Yet China is also Vietnam's largest trading partner. The economies are deeply integrated. Much of Vietnam's manufacturing depends on Chinese inputs, components, materials, machinery. Vietnamese factories often assemble products with Chinese parts. The relationship is simultaneously competitive and complementary, adversarial, and interdependent. Geopolitically, Vietnam is performing a delicate balancing act. It's depending security of cooperation with the US, regular port visits, joint exercises, defense equipment sales. The US sees Vietnam as a crucial partner, but Vietnam is careful not to formally ally with the US or join any explicit anti China coalition. It maintains the four Norths policy: no military alliances, no foreign military bases on Vietnamese soil, no allying with one country against another, no use of force. The, this balancing act is classic Vietnamese strategy. Maintain independence by playing major powers against each other. It worked during the Cold War when Vietnam balanced between the Soviet Union and China until it didn't, leading to the 1979 war. It is working now as Vietnam benefits from both Chinese trade and American security cooperation. According to this perspective, of course, everyone can has their own perspective and assessment about this subject, guys. The South China Sea is where this gets most tense. Also, we know about this point, guys. And Vietnam is increasing its military power and invest to weapons and the army as well. The nationalist card is powerful in Vietnam. Also, this is another interesting point. And also, it is careful not to let things spiral out of control because economic ties with China are too important for Vietnam. Let's talk about the political system because Vietnam remains one party authoritarian state. The Communist Party controls everything. There are no opposition parties. Media is a state control heavily censored. Dissidents are arrested. Political freedoms are severely restricted. Internet freedom is limited with significant censorship and surveillance. The party justifies its monopoly on power through performance legitimacy, delivering economic growth and rising living standards. And for most Vietnamese, particularly those who remember the poverty of the 1980s, the bargain has worked. Life has improved dramatically. Opportunities have expanded. The middle class is growing. But there are cracks in the system. Corruption remains endemic despite periodic anti corruption campaigns. The Blazing Furnace campaign under General Secretary Nguyen Phu Trong has targeted high level officials, including a president and multiple ministers, unprecedented in Vietnamese politics. But cynics note that anti corruption campaigns are also tools for political purge, removing rivals under the guise of fighting corruption. State owned enterprises, COES, remain significant, controlling key sectors like energy, telecommunications, and banking. They're often inefficient, politically connected, and resistant to reform. They crowd out private sector competition and create opportunities for corruption. Reforming or privatizing SOEs is politically difficult because they are power bases for party factions. regions. There is also growing inequality. Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City are booming, but rural areas lag behind. The central highlands and northern mountains remain poor. Urban-rural divides are widening. The benefits of growth haven't been equally distributed. Environmental degradation is severe, guys. Yes. Also, environmental issue is important. Rapid industrialization has come at enormous environmental cost. Air pollution in major cities is hazardous. Water pollution affects rivers and groundwater. Deforestation threatens biodiversity. Climate change poses existential threats. Vietnam is one of the most vulnerable countries, with the Mekong Delta at risk from rising sea levels and changing river flows. The Mekong Delta produces half of Vietnam's rice, and much of its seafood is home to 20 million people, but it's sinking due to groundwater extraction threatened by upstream dams that alter water flow and vulnerable. Thank you for watching, guys. Please drop your comments and questions about this episode 7 of Horizons East, Vietnam, the Quiet Miracle. Have a nice day. Until then, see you later.